think let's go ahead and get started because I am not seeing too many more people join. So I'd like to warmly welcome everybody who's here to the Kids on Campus webinar series. This is getting into the details of student-parent data collection, and it is session 2 of this collaborative webinar series between the Urban Institute and Kids on Campus. We'll talk a little bit about, we'll recap a little bit what this 3-part session is. Again, this is session 2 of 3, where we're talking about parenting students, and we're going to be getting into the data details of collecting parenting student data on campus. So just really quickly, I'm going to pass it to Mia, who's the director of Kids on Campus, for some quick opening remarks on her part. Mia?
Thank you, Nathan. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Mia Simpson, and I'm the director of Kids on Campus with the Association of Community College Trustees. Kids on Campus is a collaboration between ACCT and the National Head Start Association to support eligible student parents on community college campuses, as well as eligible families, by increasing the number of Head Start programs that are co-located on campuses. We do our QR code is here. So to learn more about our Kids on Campus initiative or to access some of the resources that we have available, you can access us through the QR code, or you can connect with me. Contact information will be available at the end of the presentation, as well as my director colleague on the National Head Start Association side, Susanna Hines. And we also have an initiative that has started that focuses specifically on Texas colleges and Texas Head Start programs. And so my colleague, Rachel Brazel, is another point of contact for you. And all of this information is available on our website. But we're glad to have you here today. And I am excited to turn it back over to my colleagues at the Urban Institute.
Thanks so much, Mia. Yeah, and so I would just like to introduce our Urban Institute team really quickly, if I can get my mouse to work. Okay, there we go. So our team from the Urban Institute is comprised of Teresa Anderson, myself, Nathan Sick, Kimberly Salazar, and Kate Westaby. Kate isn't able to join today, but the three of us, Teresa, myself, and Kimberly are all here. We've been working together for a long time in issues pertaining to parenting students. We've worked on many different topics, but a lot of what we've worked on together has been the Data to Action campaign for parenting students, which we'll talk about a little bit more later, in which we did discuss, I believe, in the first session. And yeah, we're really passionate about this topic, and we're excited to share some learnings with you all. So this is session 2. Session 1 was a bit more of a general policy overview and thinking about some kind of broad-reaching principles, but session 2, we're really going to get into some of the details of student-parent data collection. We're going to get into the weeds a little bit today, but hopefully that's still exciting, because one advantage of getting into the weeds is that sometimes you leave with a very specific, piece of information that hopefully can help you in some of your day-to-day when you're thinking about thinking with your colleagues or at your institution about how to collect parenting student data. So again, we're going to get very specific today. It's also a bit longer of a session than the first one. So again, the first session was why it is critical to support student parents' success using data. So that was a bit more of a broad strokes, big picture, thinking about why data matters, parenting student data in particular, but all student data in general, exploring some best practices, discovering resources that could shape effective campus strategy. So today, again, we're getting into the details. So this is tailored more for IR Institute, that's institutional research and data professionals, but I think really anyone can attend this. We're not going to be talking about like coding and stuff like that. We are going to talk a little bit about data systems and how they get set up, but I think that almost anyone on campus or part of a faculty or institutional staff could benefit from this. So practical methods for data collection and engagement. And again, this is an hour-and-a-half session. And then the final session will be using data to inform services that support student-parent success. Collecting data is one thing. Sometimes you collect the data, you see some statistics, and you're like, that's interesting. And then you go about your day. But what's really great is when you can use that data and really apply it to designing and providing more effective supports for student parents. And there are some ways to do that when you really dig in. So that will be more geared towards student services professionals. Um, and again, we'll highlight how to turn data insights into actions. But again, while it's maybe geared a bit more for student services professionals, we encourage anybody at any institution to attend. I think it's relevant for lots of folks. And that QR code there should be the registration link for that final session. Um, well, I'm going to pause. I'm going to give 5 seconds to get the QR code for anyone who didn't and wants it. Okay. Of course, you will be able to access that registration link many ways. So through this webinar series, you'll understand the value of tracking parenting student status and how insights can drive action to support student success, basically. Explore how student parent data fits within broader institutional efforts around enrollment, completion, Title IX, and workforce readiness. Learn strategies for identifying parenting students through existing systems and where to enhance data capacity. Learn to make a profile of resources, which will identify where gaps and opportunities exist. Learn to use data to action style tools. That's the projects that we run, data to action, to streamline practices and align efforts across departments, breaking down silos. Identify key stakeholders across institutional research, student services, and compliance offices to foster shared ownership of student parent data and supports. That's really also about breaking down silos. And then draft a plan, or really a plan for a plan, given that this is just a three-part webinar series, to improve data collection and usage to support tangible improvements on campus for student parents. And really, we like to remind folks that supporting parenting students, these supports can oftentimes, other than childcare, can be applied to almost any student on campus. So if you can support parenting students really well, then you can probably support almost anybody, because parenting students are balancing a lot of different challenges. So we'd love for you to meet your fellow attendees in the chat. If you just want, there's not enough time, I think, to go through a round robin of intros. There's, more than 30 people on this, but your name, role, college, and then also, have you been a student parent, known a student parent, or helped a student parent? So I'm going to give folks just a little bit of time to get started on that, and then you can keep going as I move along through the next couple slides. But I'm going to pause for just 10 seconds. Be nice if we could do a full round robin of introductions, but it would take a while. I'm going to be passing it to my colleague, Teresa Anderson, who is going to give a little bit of big picture stuff. We did spend some of session one doing big picture stuff, so we're not going to go too in depth here, but it's really important to think about these factors that really drive our work. So Teresa is going to handle the next couple of slides.
Yes, hi everyone. It's good to see you here. I see a couple of familiar names, and some of you might have heard me talk about this before, and I just say that's good because maybe it means that it'll be easier for you to recite it when you're trying to explain it to someone else who's in a decision-making position. So supporting student parents makes sense. That's the thesis. And if we go to the next slide here, parenting students are a key population. So there's over 3 million undergrads and over 1.5 million community and technical college students who have dependent children. Almost 3/4 of them had a non-work study job and were working on average 36 hours a week. So that's pretty much full time. That means logically they were more than twice as likely to be enrolled part-time, but managed to maintain GPAs that were similar to their non-parenting classmates of a 3.2 on average. And doing all of that while raising not just one, but on average 2 children. So what this all comes down to is student parents are juggling at least 3 heavy bowling-sized balls all the time, and we can be thinking about how to support them. Having fun with the bowling balls. So payoffs, so supporting student parents has payoffs for the parent. So this is based on some research where we looked at the outcomes for mothers who return to school, not because we don't care for fathers, but because the data set that we were using for this analysis only track the children of women in the original survey. But what we see is when moms go back to school, they have earnings gains averaging over $2,700 a year and almost $9,000 a year if they complete a college degree and they didn't have one before. We also see that their children have benefits. So as children gain in reading and verbal scores in the short term, the children are 21% more likely to enroll in college and 38% more likely to get a college degree. And this survey tracked kids through age 29 on average. So even in early adulthood, the children of mothers who completed a college degree saw earnings gains of about over $5,400 on average in that early adulthood years. And we could expect that to continue to grow as they get older. We also see payoffs for states and colleges. So we did an analysis looking at the effects of investing in student parent supports in the state of Virginia and saw that targeted supportive programming, kind of similar to the CUNY ACCT model, if you all are familiar with that, had a return on investment of $5.36 for every dollar spent, which is an enormous return on investment. If you took that to Wall Street, everyone would jump on it. But even these other interventions that we looked at a $3,000 annual scholarship, which had a return of $1.73 per dollar spent, also a huge return. And even campus childcare, which we know is expensive, but has very large payoffs to graduation based on existing research, has $1.24 per dollar spent in payoffs. And that yields the largest increase in graduates because it makes such a big difference. All that said, so that's the payoffs to college, to states, but also colleges stand to benefit. There's over 30 million parents of minor children in the United States who do not have a college degree and are not currently in school. And a third of them have some college experience, that's some college no degree population. So we can be thinking about this as an important recruitment population for colleges that are trying to kind of serve their community and strengthen the workforce through bringing people into the institutions. So more states have recognized this. A growing number of states have implemented student parent data collection. In case your geography is rusty, it started in Oregon, and then in Oregon was the first state to pass a mandate to collect student parent data on the student record level, championed by Michaela Martin, who started this by, she was a community college student who went to the child care center at her college with her son and said, I need childcare. And they said, okay, there's a 3-year wait list. And she said, well, this is supposed to be a 2-year college. How can you have a 3-year wait list? And she just kept asking questions and said, why don't, how many other people are in my situation? Why isn't there enough childcare? Why do we not know how many student parents there are? How are you going to provide supports that make sense if you don't even know who you're talking about? And that led to eventually new legislation passing in Oregon, and Illinois passed similar legislation just one day later in 2022, excuse me. 2021, excuse me, to collect data on students' parenting status. California followed a year later with giving student parents priority registration through the AB 2881 legislation. And when you create priority registration for a group, you have to track who that group is. And so that created a de facto data collection mandate. And there was additional legislation in 2024 passed in California that enhanced the support for student parents. Texas in 2023 passed a whole suite of supports. They went further, not only supporting student parent data collection and priority registration, but also providing additional protections for student parents and requiring colleges to have liaison positions for student parents to help them be able to navigate systems and programs within and outside the college. And then Minnesota a year later did all of that and allocated funding within the state to support the Kids on Campus initiative to have more Head Start partnerships with the college, as you all are familiar with. So this has been growing. But the thing that was interesting as more states were passing data collection mandates, there was a question about how do you collect those data? And what do you do to actually use the data to support student outcomes? So we developed at the Urban Institute a college learning community in states that had data collection mandates to help with data development to inform actions that would support student parent success. It was interesting because we did a landscape scan at the very beginning and we looked across um, 21 different efforts to identify students who are parents, and not a single one used the same definition or wording. So there was just no agreement on how to do this, and that's where a lot of this work came out of. So we've been working with, you'll see the stars on the map. There were 10 grantees. It was 7 community colleges, 1 community college citywide system, and 2 universities across Oregon, Illinois, and California. And there's a big old star on Texas because we are working with 13 community colleges and universities across the state of Texas with support from the state and the Greater Texas Foundation to start a new cohort. So we're pretty excited to be expanding this work and to share insights from it with you all today. And with that, I will hand it back to Nathan.
Thank you, Teresa. So that was a great overview of not just some national level data on why this topic is so important, but then also showing that there's a lot of change happening in this area, or at least a lot of state level change. That's, I guess, what, 5 states in fairly rapid succession have passed this kind of legislation. And there has been talk about national level legislation, and now we're going to dive into why the data are powerful. And all of this is drawn from lessons that we've learned through the Data to Action campaign that Teresa was just mentioning. So this is from working with the colleges in those 10 states, and then as we're now starting to work with those 10 colleges across 3 states, and then the colleges in Texas that we're beginning to get to know right now. A key quote, I think this might have been from Michaela Martin, which is, when you are invisible, so are your problems. So when you don't have any data on a set of students or a population of students who are either have a characteristic or are experiencing something, something shared challenges, shared opportunities as well, you are effectively invisible. It's really challenging to design supports for students, interventions, when you're not sure how many students there are in that group or who are in that group of students. And again, knowing averages on the national, regional, or even state level is not enough. That can be interesting. It can be helpful, if you're a college in Tennessee and you see, what the averages are in the state of Tennessee, that's interesting, but it doesn't necessarily tell you what's going on at your own institution in your community. So colleges and systems ideally need to be able to identify how many parenting students they're serving and how many could they be serving. So Teresa mentioned that recruitment population. Also, what their parenting students look like, what kind of backgrounds they're coming from, what kind of challenges they're experiencing, what kind of opportunities they have, what kind of educational trajectories are they on. And yeah, what are the trajectories for these students? Not just in education, but also in the workforce as they complete their credentials, or as they hopefully complete their credentials. So a lot of what we're going to be talking about is from this helpful resource. We published this recently. So on the left is a QR code that takes you to our project page, I think. On the right is a paper which can be found in that project page. Kimberly, if you want to drop the links in the chat, that'd be awesome. You've already done it. This paper is a version 2.0 that we published. The first version was published earlier on in the Data to Action campaign, and the second version was after we'd worked with colleges for a couple years and learned quite a bit more. There will surely be a version 3, but version 2 is definitely much improved from version 1. So we're going to get into the weeds a little bit now, some practical suggestions for data collection. Okay, so steps you can take. You can examine your institution's data capacity and reflect on any data insights that you have right now. So think about, what are you currently tracking? What would you like to track? What would you like to track but haven't been able to due to technical problems or technical challenges? Or what would you like to track that maybe is low-hanging fruit that you could implement? Look at data, document resources that can be shared with students and used to guide future actions. So think about how to share information about resources with students and how to make sure also those resources are available to faculty and staff. And develop specific strategies for using data to take action. So once you've examined your data capacity and thought about how you might want to build it out, change it, or better leverage it as it stands today, you can think about how to use strategies to really improve campus life and supports for parenting students. And then again, we really think you can apply those kinds of lessons to other non-parenting students as well. So steps you can take, you can develop specific strategies for visibility and stakeholder engagement, and all of these steps should be data informed. So you can think about how to use the data that you have to help increase visibility and engage stakeholders. So understanding and knowing the details of student parents on campus can really help you make a case for why supports are needed. It can help you come to new partners and show them how they can help support parenting students. And it can just help be a motivator to show, that there's a need on campus. As Teresa mentioned, approximately 30% of community college students around the country are parents. So it's really not a small population. This is a lot of students. You can learn about new best practices to engage students and leverage their expertise. So a lot of that, so Kimberly's going to talk about that a little bit later. That can involve having student parent members on teams that you have on campus. Um, that can involve bringing student parents into key decision-making processes in a way that's not tokenized, where their lived expertise is valued, and you understand that they know best a lot of the times what it's like to go through their campus experience as a parenting student and how they could be supported. And then also codify your goals in your institutional strategy. So make your goals official. A lot of folks talk about devising a North Star, shooting for the moon. Some folks prefer, to take more bite-sized and reasonable goals, or both. I think any approach works, but just codifying institutional goals so that folks on campus know the direction that you're headed and that the aim is to support parenting students. All right. So there's actually 6 total ways. I'll mention the 6th in a second, but we've really identified 5 points. There's more. You can kind of get parse these out and think about other scenarios. But really, in terms of data systems that we're talking about today, there's really 5 main ways that we've identified for colleges to collect parenting student status. And we have seen all 5 of these and the 6th that I'll mention in practice at real schools. And I would say almost every different combination of them has been used as well. So no 2 colleges that we've worked with so far have been exactly alike in terms of how their data infrastructure is set up and how they work with, collect, and use data. But a very common way to collect parenting student data that you might think of is at application. So that would be a state system or college level application when a student first goes and interacts with your institution. So they're applying to enroll at your school, and that can provide you with perhaps a near census of students who are parents coming into school. But as we know, it's one time only usually. And there can be some data infrastructure challenges with it. We'll talk a little bit more about data infrastructure as we go. Some schools, host their application on a separate platform. I know one school we worked with, has all of their main information on Genzabar, but they collect their application on Salesforce or even a different kind of data system. So it can be a little bit of a challenge from data management, but nevertheless, this is a great way to start a cohort of students with a fairly good census of parenting student status. But as we know, parenting student status can change over time. So someone might not be a parent at application, but by their 2nd year, or especially at a 4-year institution, by the time they complete their degree, they may well be a parent and perhaps could have used support in that meantime. So that's one of the challenges, is that parental status changes, and it is something where if you only collected an application, you're probably not getting the full picture. So registration is another way that we've seen schools collect parenting student status, and it is a good way to do it, although not all schools collect data like this at registration. So that would be something that we've heard most often referred to as a registration intake form, which is often used for priority registration. Some schools use it just for registration in general. It's a form that's fielded usually within 2 weeks or so of the time of registration each term, and students will fill this questionnaire out. It's usually a fairly short questionnaire that can update some basic contact information. Sometimes it asks about majors or fields of study, and it can collect, a little bit of information about students before registration. Some schools, this is very natural for. Other schools we've talked to do not do this at all and have thought that it would be a very big challenge or did not want to implement. Some downsides of it are, that it could potentially add a small barrier to registration. But a good upside is that it's a very rigorous method of data collection. It should get most students, and it happens every term. Nudges or SIS profiles. This is the trickiest one to explain. I'm going to not say too much about it because we're going to talk about it a little bit more. But this is used in a student information system. That's what SIS means. And it's launched essentially at some point when students are on their student information system platform, something like Genzabar or Oracle, and or even Salesforce or something like that, or Blackboard, but usually more like Genzabar or Oracle. And these can be launched as often as you want. And it's basically a little pop-up questionnaire that happens when students are online logged into their profile. And actually, in fact, most schools launch it at the time of login. So a student comes to log in, and at some point during their term, this questionnaire is triggered, and they are able to answer some questions about their parental status or other questions as well. Some schools have combined parental status with other questions. Surveys are what you think they are, basically a set of questions that's fielded to gain information about students. You can field them as often as you want, and they can have as many questions or as few questions as you want. We'll talk about those a little bit more also, but one of the key challenges with surveys these days are that they are really a lot of work to field, and along with them comes pretty low response rates from what we've seen lately. It is rare these days to find a survey getting more than a 10% response rate. So we recommend them being used more as a supplemental data collection to kind of understand preferences of your students rather than being the main source of parenting student data collection. And then last, we've got external data, like public program data, for example, from iPads, or there's various nationally available surveys. iPads actually doesn't have parental status, but there's several different nationally available surveys from the Department of Education that do have parental status. But FAFSA was a really commonly used external data source, and that is no longer an option, which we'll talk about a little bit more. So external data is great for triangulating, getting a decent sense of things, but it's not going to usually tell you about your own campus. So again, using the example of a school in Tennessee, if you're a community college and you field a survey and you get 5% of your students are parents, but using nationally available or public data, you see that on average 30% of students are parents at community colleges in Tennessee, then you might question your 5% number. So it can be kind of helpful for triangulating, but it's not going to give you the actual raw number for your campus. Lastly, the one that I didn't mention is manual data entry. And we've actually worked with some colleges that have done that, which basically means that students, as they go into meetings in student services or supports, that staff, as they find out that students are a parent, manually enter their parental status into some kind of indicator or field in their data system. And we found that that's a lot of effort, and can be prone to error, and is not something that we recommend, although some schools do it when they need to. Okay, so FAFSA no longer provides useful information about most students with dependents. This has been a rapidly changing situation. We recommend reading the blog that we just linked there, although there may have even been some changes since that blog. There was an issue with the skip patterns in the FAFSA that have since perhaps been fixed, but nevertheless, the wording of the question itself has been changed so that it now just talks about students who are caretakers in general. So students with any kind of dependent. So it could include a student with actually an older person who they're caring for, and not necessarily a child. So even with that, the issues with the skip patterns made FAFSA pretty much unusable, although I do believe they may have recently fixed that. But again, the situation with FAFSA is unstable, and we don't recommend using FAFSA anymore as a primary source. It's fine to use it as a secondary source to see who might be a parenting student on your campus, but it's definitely not going to give you the full percentage for your campus. Okay, so in our brief that we published, we have some example questions. We also have some example language, which we didn't include in here because we're not going to put just like a whole big long paragraph on the screen. But if you want language for how to like introduce these questions to parenting students, which we think is really important, please check out the brief that we linked earlier and feel free to copy the language that we have and adapt it. But we do have some, example questions. So this would be a 2-question approach. And these have been field tested with some parenting students, thanks to our partners at Child Trends. The first one would be, so this is if you have 2 questions. You could say, check as many of the following categories as apply to you. So it's a check all that apply question, which can actually be a little tricky to implement in data systems, but is very effective at getting a lot of information in one question, because in a way, it's essentially 5 questions. So you would check as many that apply. You would say, I'm currently parenting at least 1 child. I am currently pregnant. I am not pregnant, but I'm expecting to become a parent in the next 9 months, which could capture folks who are planning to adopt or expectant fathers. I am not currently parenting, pregnant, or expectant, or prefer not to say. These options can be adjusted. Some schools would prefer not to ask about pregnancy status, for example. And you can make this quite a bit simpler if you remove some of these options. So this is kind of the maximum. This is to get as many statuses as you can capture in one question. And colleges who use this are able to edit this down if they prefer. But you'll notice that there's not any qualifiers on here, like age of 18 or older. Do you spend more than half your time with your child? It just allows the student to identify whether or not they're currently parenting. So that captures a lot of different possible relationships and parenting arrangements. Then you can also ask for the following categories. So this would be only if someone indicated that they are parenting in the first question. Indicate the number of children that you're parenting. So this is an example of some commonly used age ranges in research that map up to a lot of policy areas. Children ages 0 to 2, ages 3 to 5, 6 to 12, 13 to 17, and 18 or older. So this will give you, these 2 questions together will give you almost everything that you want to know within reason about parenting students and their family situations. It is very important to only ask questions if you plan to use them. So a lot of folks have asked, why would we ask about the number of children? And, one example for why you might is if you are fundraising for a childcare center and you'd like to know, or if you're operating a childcare center on campus and you'd like to know, or are looking at having a Head Start partnership, and you want to know, how many students might we be serving? Or how many actual children are there, right? So how many actual children might we be serving and in what age range? So that can really help you gauge childcare needs on campus. But we do recommend that you strongly consider, if you're not currently in any position to offer childcare on campus, this is something that you could consider skipping, because we do not recommend asking any questions that you don't end up using for a specific purpose, because then it just places undue burden on the student parents. Now, this one is a doozy. We're not going to go through this as detailed because it basically combines the last 2 questions. Some colleges have noted that they really only have space for 1 question. Sometimes legislation mandates that you can only add 1 question. This is a way to capture pretty much everything in one single question. A lot of these categories can be combined or, again, omitted in some cases. So some states or institutions may not want to ask about pregnancy status. There are many reasons why you may prefer not to ask. And if that's the case, some of these options can be removed. It is possible to consolidate the age ranges if you don't need to know that information to simplify this. But we wanted to show what is the full picture and then let colleges adapt it to their own needs. So again, very similar definitions, but this just is a check all that apply for basically every option. And this will give you whether or not folks are parents or pregnant, the age ranges of their children, and it'll give you a lower bound on how many children they have. You'll notice that in this way, as a check all that apply, it doesn't actually give you the number of children in each age range, but at least gives you a general sense of the minimum number of children that you might be serving through their parents on campus. So again, this is a huge question, pretty unyieldy, but we have field tested this. Parents did not feel that it was too burdensome. And we also recommend that if this feels like too much, that you edit this down if you plan to use these kinds of questions. But these are just some examples. So some example supplemental questions. So sometimes colleges, want a count of children, but cannot or prefer not to ask about each child age category. Again, in which case, you can actually display the second question, how many children are you currently parenting? And given the complicated and fluid nature of partnership status, if you want to know about single or solo parents, you can ask this question. Are you currently a single parent to any of the children you are parenting? Yes, no, prefer not to say. These questions seem pretty simple and self-evident, but trust us in reviewing every single source that did ask these questions that we could find at the start of this project. There are a lot of ways that folks have overcomplicated these questions, made them confusing, or added a lot of criteria, which sometimes are important. Some states and localities really only want to know about children under the age of 18. But nevertheless, we've tried to simplify it here in these recommendations. Again, these were also field tested, and parents did say that they did not prefer the term solo parents. They identified mostly with single parent, and we let them define that themselves. So rather than combining a clunky marital status variable that, oftentimes doesn't really capture people's true relationship statuses, you just ask people, are you a single parent? And that is probably the plainest way to do it. And you let folks self-identify like, yeah, I'm in a situation where I'm a single parent. So with any question asked, again, this reiterates what I just said. It's important that colleges have a plan to use for the data so that only relevant information is collected and students aren't burdened providing answers that aren't going to inform policy. So it's better to have too few questions than to have way too many. Okay, so what do we actually recommend? In version 1.0 of our brief, which you don't need to go back and read that because we've improved it for version 2, we really just listed pros and cons of all those different methods I talked about for a long time before. But now, after having worked with colleges for 2 years, we're comfortable saying this is what we recommend. Like, we feel this is the best way forward. It could evolve over time, but for now, we think colleges should start at the application, add that question, a parenting student status question at application, and then do a routine data update through either registration intake forms or a nudge. We've seen those two work in practice for sure. So applications, students are already answering a bajillion questions. A lot of them are fairly intrusive about their income, about all kinds of things, of their background, sometimes their families, education levels. Applications can be like 100 questions. So adding another question there, no big deal, usually. We do recommend including language that says like this will not affect your chances of being admitted, because some folks think that if they say they're a parent, they might not get admitted. We did include that language on our brief, so if you'd like to see it, feel free to copy that language. And then we recommend updating that status on a regular basis, either at registration intake or with a nudge. Schools that already have a registration intake form, it's pretty easy to just add another question to it for most of those schools, and that's what we've seen some schools do. For schools that don't already have this, it's a bigger change. It's going to your data folks and designing a whole new form. It's figuring out, how do we get the word out about this form? How do students see it? When do they see it? What data system do we use? How do we analyze it? How do we merge it with our other data? Is that a whole process? Does it need to be on Salesforce and then we merge it into our main SIS or something like that? It's a lot to design. So that's a big decision to make. But for schools that already have this, it is not a huge deal to add another question. And a lot of schools have thought about this. So we've talked to a number of schools that have said we don't have a registration intake form. We kind of wish we did. So this could be good motivation to build one. Firstly, determine whether it's right for your institution. That basically comes down to everything I just said. The form should be accessible at a convenient time before registration. So a lot of schools we've talked to send email links several weeks leading up to the course. And they will pass through several questions first. So it should not make registering for courses substantially more stressful. That's a big goal, is to not make registration harder than it might already be. We've talked to some schools that say the registration is super chill. Other schools say it's kind of stressful. We know that parenting students have a lot of scheduling considerations. Scheduling is one of their top concerns. So making sure that registration is as not stressful as possible is really important. Ideally, again, deploy a form within the SIS. So if you have, I just keep using Genzabar as an example, but there's many SIS out there that ideally you can deploy it within that. So that minimizes your level of burden. Ideally, this data is just tied to a student record and you have it there in your data warehouse or your database, and you don't need to do a bunch of work to actually analyze this data. It's just tied right there to a student's record and you can use it, relatively easily. Consider using this data to offer priority registration. If you do offer priority registration to parenting students, I would argue this data is mandatory, because how are you going to offer priority registration to parenting students if you don't know who they are? And you need to find out who they are before registration. So I would say, that's pretty much mandatory if you offer priority registration. And again, ensure it does not impede registration. So we always recommend that prefer not to say is an option. So prefer not to say is a valid response in our recommendation. A student should always be allowed to check that they would rather not say, and that counts as a response in and of itself. That's not a non-response. That is a response. A non-response would be just like student ignores the form, doesn't enter it at all. Okay, so nudges are the other alternative. I think there's a school in Texas who we're not working with, but who I talked to, who is actually using both and has a registration intake form and a nudge. That's not necessary, but we have talked to some schools who didn't really want to go the route of registration, so they built a nudge. We recommend that you tie it to login. That's what we've seen be useful. So you add gated content to your login screen. Most modern SIS will allow this. So every school that we've seen, excuse me, every school that we've worked with that has tried to do this said they were able to, and it wasn't too hard. You may need to inject JavaScript or SQL or other code to control how often students see it and turn it off after they've completed it. That varies by system. We have not yet encountered a school that said they just couldn't do this. All the schools were able to do this and said it wasn't too painful, but the exact details of how to do it could depend on your data system and how it's set up. Ideally, it redirects students to a custom form within their SIS. So again, so that their answer is tied to the student ID in your SIS database, and you don't have to do a whole bunch of work to analyze the data. Alternatively, you could use Qualtrics, Salesforce, or another platform. One school built a totally custom platform just out of cold fusion, out of their code, but the data kind of got orphaned when they did that. And it was a bit of a challenge for them. They weren't able to easily analyze it. So that is a hurdle we've seen. But other schools were able to build this out in their SIS. Deploy it to all students at least once per term, ideally early in the term. So students should see this every term. One school started doing it once a year. They felt that wasn't enough. Also, this should be persistent. I mean, we've been pretty candid about it. It should be annoying. So the idea is that it pops up at every login until they complete it. So a student can ignore it. They go to log in, it pops up. They can exit out of it. But the next time they log in, it'll pop up again. And it'll do that until they complete it. That is described as annoying, but we have actually consulted with many students about this. And students have said it's not a big deal. Yeah, it's a little annoying. It's not like the end of the world. And most students have told us that they don't think that's a big deal and they're fine with it that way. And again, checking prefer not to say should always be an option, and that will cancel it from then on. That is now their response, is prefer not to say. And then another thing we've seen a school do is to add a link to the form on the student's main profile navigation menu so that it's the same question essentially, and they can just edit it from a different place. So one of the schools, when you log into your kind of student portal, there's an option there on the sidebar where they have all their different parts of their student record that says, here's your little student parent status, and they can update it there. Several colleges use the above protocols to gain high coverage. I'll be totally transparent. We actually had the number 80% in there. We're not 100% sure a school got 80%. I do think one of our schools got 80% coverage. That includes prefer not to say options. But regardless, I know of at least 2 schools who have done this and got high coverage, like where they feel like they're getting most of their student parent statuses completed. Okay, that was a lot, but nudges are something that you know, is pretty doable, but also kind of new to a lot of folks. And these have been some questions we've been answering as we go, like how often should they pop up? How persistent should they be? You know, what should they be tied to? At one point, we were thinking about, you know, we were talking to some schools who were trying password changes, but we think on login, within the SIS if possible, at least once per term early in the term, and a very persistent pop-up that you can exit out of, so it'll never prevent you from logging in, but it'll keep popping up until you answer it. And then also put a link to the same status on the student profile. All of those things we think give you pretty good data coverage. So some additional considerations. Consider how to store the data. So there's at least, we're not going to go into this in detail here, and our version 1.0 of the blog does, but you'll need to think about how to store the data. There's at least 3 ways to store student parent data. You can have one record per student, like somehow just create an indicator that is like, is the student a parent, yes or no? And that can be, you know, that's actually a little more complicated than you might think, because if you're asking every term, how do you roll that information up to be one status? So one school that we had, there's a big table that gets built of their parenting student statuses, and that table just gets longer and longer and longer every time a student answers the question. But then they've got SQL code that picks the latest answer and then populates one indicator to the student record. So they have, you know, a million answers, you know, as a student goes through all the different time periods, but in the end, there's one status. You can create a new variable each time a student is asked. So for every term, basically a new variable. So like, you know, fall term 2025, parent status, yes, no. Fall, you know, spring term 2026, parent status, yes, no, and so on. And again, like I mentioned before, you can create a new record each time a student is asked. So you're just adding records every time a student gets asked. But again, then you need some code to pick what is the most recent record, what is the student now, because you'll have multiple entries per student. Okay, so you also want to engage, inform, and minimize threats to students. I think that Kimberly will be talking about that a little bit later. Oh, I think I'm way behind time, so I'm gonna try and speed up actually. You can also reach out to faculty, so you can inform faculty about data collection, so they can support it, and engage faculty to help promote options for students and improve flexibility. So I do want to say this is huge. We've heard about faculty engagement being absolutely crucial for reaching out and supporting parenting students, and then also protecting sensitive information. So make sure you abide by FERPA protections and protocols and ensure data are only shared with people who have a legitimate educational interest. We think this data basically falls under standard FERPA protocols from everything that we've noted, but you should continue to follow those protocols. So we've shared these links a lot, and I'm running short on time, so I'm going to skip that. I have a whole other section to go through, and not much time to do it. So I'm going to go through it relatively quickly and just highlight some of the key pieces. Okay, so you want to work to inform at least 4 types of goals. Data infrastructure goals. So essentially better data collection. That's everything we just talked about. Resource and support goals, institutional practice goals. So resource and support goals would be how to support parenting students. Institutional practice goals, which can relate to institutional policies and practices, other elements of institutional operations, and I'm going to give examples of these. And then sustainability goals. So if you have fundraising efforts or programming efforts, think about how to sustain those efforts going forward using your data. So we're going to talk a little bit about each of these. I think I've been given a little bit more time, but I'm still not going to spend too much time in the weeds here. We will share these slides out. But on the left is going to be data pieces, and on the right are actions you can take. All of these are real data pieces, and all of the actions are real actions that we've seen colleges take. And we're going to talk a bit about specific examples. So student outcomes data, that could be from your application, matriculation rates, circumstances of incoming students, using academic data like from Blackboard or wherever you track course completion, grades and attendance, course load, retention rates. Credentials, you can look at transfer, completion, and persistence rates. And then workforce can be challenging to get good workforce data, but employment and earnings data, maybe from state UI data, career growth, and debt. Um, so all of these, when paired with parenting student data, you can take actions like conduct marketing and outreach to improve matriculation. So you can reach out to students who are parents who applied but didn't attend your school. You can engage with faculty and programs with struggling parents. This is a huge one. Looking at grades and completion across specific programs, you can highlight programs where student parents aren't doing as well for whatever reason, and reach out to the faculty there and see if there's any policies that you can tweak to help with that. Intensive outreach when grades drop. So you can try and reach out to students when their grades suddenly drop and engage them with parenting supports. And you can better support workforce or grad school or post completion transitions by understanding how parenting students are faring in their different work and education fields after they complete. So you can also track student basic needs and supports. So there you can have usage data. So like how much did student parents engage in academic support, financial, housing, childcare, food and diaper banks, health and mental health programs, and just general utilization rates. You can do surveys. So this is a great use for surveys to try and see what are unmet needs, things you just don't know about. What are the most important needs? So maybe you can't solve all problems, but what are the most important needs for parents in their view? You can look for groups with heightened needs, and you can build a profile of resources that talks about what are student parents not using and what new potential partnerships are there. So you can coordinate, you can take actions with this data, like coordinating with outreach for other related groups, like veteran groups or veteran support on campus. That's something we've seen one college do. Conduct information campaigns for underutilized needs. So some colleges have said we actually have this support, it's just not being used. Sometimes that's just a knowledge gap, and you can conduct an information campaign. You can seek new community partners or grants when current supports are not enough, and you can share information with students, faculties, and supports and staff on available support. So a syllabi statement that goes out in classrooms is a huge thing that we've seen and we've heard can be very effective. Lastly, student perception. So you can run student surveys to see perceptions about the institution. How do they feel life on campuses for parenting students? Student priorities. You can have advising conversations to gain feedback and programs and supports and common tripping points. You can run focus groups to find barriers and common barriers and helpful supports to learn about experiences and opportunities. And you can do student-led outreach to get candid reflections shared with peers. So actions you can take, modify practices so that students feel welcome on campus by mentioning parenting students more often, making sure they're visible, having open door administrative policies, offer supports proactively rather than making students learn about them themselves and come to you. You can learn that they're a student parent and offer them supports. You can revise campus policies based on student feedback, and you can share leadership with students and develop their own research capacity by allowing students to conduct focus groups and engage in student-led outreach. So I'm now going to pass it to Kimberly. Thank you for bearing with me for a couple extra minutes. I know that was a lot. So Kimberly is going to talk a little bit about collecting data with student-centered principles.
Thank you, Nathan. So this slide speaks to the four guiding principles created by the student parents and caregivers that were a part of the Student Parent Advisory Board from the Data to Action campaign. And this rubric ensures that data collection is done ethically, respectfully, and in partnership with student parents, parenting students, and caregivers. So centered data collection prioritizes safety and agency. Collecting data with students in mind means minimizing threats and risks, ensuring that they benefit from the data collected, and using strong protections to keep their information safe. It shifts the focus from just extracting information to building trust and accountability. So these principles emphasize students as partners, not just subjects. By sharing power with student parents and valuing and centering their lived expertise, we're not just collecting the data, but we're co-creating knowledge that reflects their reality. This approach fosters inclusivity, improves data quality, and makes findings more actionable for system change. Next slide, please. Thank you. So once the data is collected, these 4 principles show how institutions can move beyond collection and application, sans lived expertise, to actually improve students' experiences and outcomes with the partnership of student parents, parenting students, and caregivers. So first, using data means not just gathering it, but applying it with purpose, starting with understanding student, parents, and their actual needs, so being informed. Then it's about breaking down silos and working across departments to respond to what the data reveals, breaking down silos. And just as important, student voice must remain at the center. Partnering with student parents and parenting students and caregivers ensures that data is interpreted with context and acted on responsibly. And so finally, when institutions use data to advocate for more supports and share what works, they not only improve outcomes locally, but also model student-centered leadership across the field and across the institution. Next slide, please. So the purpose of this rubric is fourfold. It helps guide and support initiatives such as data collection on student parents that meaningfully engage student parents, and provides a structured framework for action. It demonstrates clear engagement criteria so teams or those working with student parents know what authentic involvement looks like in practice. It encourages partners to acknowledge real-world limitations like budget, staffing, and time, so expectations are realistic across the board. And finally, it helps reduce stigma and elevate student parents' lived expertise, ensuring their voices shape solutions. So overall, this rubric is meant to be both practical and aspirational, a tool for reflection, planning, and building stronger, more inclusive engagement. This long-term goal is to ultimately shift the culture of colleges to be more family-friendly and to center lived expertise, which in turn helps build trust and buy-in from student-parent population, addressing challenges like low response rates, underutilization of campus resources, and broader disengagement. Next slide, please. So here's a link for the rubric, which again is designed as both a reflective and action-based tool for engaging student parents. You can use it in 2 ways: in a group setting, like advisory boards or committees, and use it at the college-wide level to assess overall engagement practices. It helps you identify strengths, gaps, and next steps while giving teams and individual one-on-ones a common language for building authentic partnership with student parents, parenting students, and caregivers. So this rubric is flexible and could be adapted to fit where your team or institution is in the process. If any questions come up as you use the rubric, please feel free to contact me directly. We'll be sharing contact info at the end of the session, and I'll pass the baton to Teresa to give examples from the field.
Thank you so much, Kimberly and Nathan. And just to let everyone know, we're going to be doing some breakouts so you have some time to talk with each other soon. We just have so much great information we're excited to share with you. And people always benefit from some examples, so we wanted to make sure we highlight those. So with that, I'd like to start with an example of San Diego Mesa College. Some of you might be familiar. San Diego Mesa has been a national leader in student parent supports for some years. And they had some really neat strategies where they were able to use data to inform services and supports for student parents. So the first here is that they examined student parent data alongside course completion rates and found that parenting students were experiencing more challenges in certain courses compared to their non-parenting peers. And they also looked at their tutoring and saw that some of the student parents weren't using the tutoring as much as they wanted them to be. So in response, they were able to implement parent-specific tutoring at flexible times that was more attuned to the student parent population. And they also focused on the programs and subject areas where there was the greatest opportunities for improvement as revealed by the data. The second one was that they found that a rule in some programs where missing 3 classes resulted in failure was causing parents to fail at a higher rate. You all might have attendance policies, but they do disproportionately affect parents. So in response, they're looking to soften that rule or provide exceptions for parents. And finally, they also had a comprehensive student parent perception survey and student run focus groups to gather more insightful data about the student parent population. And one of the big things that came out of that was the desire for more kid-friendly spaces and student parent events. And so that's something that they've been working to implement. And they also just have like a really cool design marketing team that's been putting out these like beautiful flyers, which also just makes it feel really festive and like high touch. The second example is Cal Poly SLO, California Polytechnic State University. They were one of the 2 universities that's been part of the Data Action campaign, and they're one that a lot of folks on campus think of themselves as a very like big air quotes traditional institution. They don't really recognize kind of other types of students beyond the sort of traditional high school graduate who's coming in. But there's been a big effort. Dr. Tina Chuick, who's a professor or faculty member at Cal Poly SLO, and her team have been working really hard to bring visibility to the parenting population. And they collected parental status at student enrollment and wanted to make the findings more accessible to people on campus and in the public, and created a public-facing data visualization dashboard that you can actually go to online. I don't know, Kimberly, if you have the chat, if you have the link, you want to drop it in the chat. But it's really important to be able to bring that conversation to the college to say, hey, look, we have students with dependents, here's what they are, they're all across the university, and we need to be thinking about them. And then the third and final example that I wanted to share is from Klamath College, which is a rural college in Oregon. So this was an example of an institution that implemented that parental status logging questionnaire. And they found that the response rate was pretty low, and they're actually now one of the like top examples that we like talking about, because they were able to add the questionnaire to the student profile within their MyKCC like learning management system. I think it's a learning management system, but it like links to the student profile, so students could access that questionnaire at will and change. And the institutional research team also changed the settings so it was deployed more often, and like basically had a pop-up that was like kind of annoying, but like again, as Nathan said, annoying's not always bad, and they've been getting a very high coverage rate. They also realized that student parent visibility was low on campus, so they are working now to make a video to be used for recruitment and visibility of their new student parent club. And they're going to be using that to build campus-wide support. And they're actually building, the whole time they've been working on a capital campaign to build a childcare center on campus that serves not only their institution, but also the broader rural community in which they're situated, so that they can increase childcare options for parents inside and outside the college. So those are some examples of where data can be really helpful. And with that, we are going to let you all talk to each other. So I'm going to pass it back to Nathan to introduce the activity, and then hopefully you'll have some time for some conversation.
Thank you, Kimberly and Teresa. Super interesting. And yeah, so we're going to have a short breakout activity. These are very chill. It's just to give you all a chance to reflect on these thoughts with each other. And there is a little bit of an activity, which can kind of make it a bit more fun and structured, so that you're not just kind of talking, randomly, but you have something to kind of think about. So we have some what if scenarios about parenting students. I'm not going to read through all of these. It's just a way to apply these to your own campus situation, and just think, where do we stand right now? So the first column is what data. So the rows are different scenarios. So for example, the first one is, in most programs, student parents are doing well, but in the biology program, their performance drops off sharply in the third term. All of these are based on some real world scenario that we've heard from colleges. They're anonymized and generalized, but these are all real things that colleges have experienced. And the first column is, what data would you need to discover this scenario? So think about that. Like, harken back to the data that we showed. What data would you need to even know this in the first place? Could you even find this? Could you even know this scenario? Secondly, do you have this data? Which is kind of a simple yes or no question. And then the last one is, what would you do next now that you've learned this? So how would you transfer this data that you have or this finding into taking a bit of action? So Kimberly has been so helpful as to drop the mural in the chat. So here's a link to it. I believe we'll be dropping you into some smallish breakout rooms. And you should definitely designate. Yeah, so thank you, Kimberly. You're so on top of it. So while you're chatting, if you could nominate and designate someone to just put a comment in the chat when you return. So this is low stakes. We're not going to pick on you and make you speak to the whole group or anything like that. But be ready to just give a update. And if you'd like to raise your hand and come off mute, that's fine too. If you'd prefer that to writing in the chat. But we want this to be chill. So yeah, I think we can go ahead and drop people into the breakouts right now. If
Oh, and can I clarify one thing before we
Yeah.
do that? I apologize before we lose folks. So
Oh,
we do have
I'll
this
lose you.
mural. Feel free to just pick one that you want to talk about. You don't have to do all of them. It's not like a big homework assignment. It's just like pick one that looked interesting and then you can kind of brainstorm together. So good to see smiling faces coming back. Sorry.
Like we're getting folks back in.
Is this being sent out, the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, that should be everyone back in the main room.
Cool. So yeah, I hope that folks had fun looking that over. I think sometimes maybe having the full unstructured discussion is better. For some folks, sometimes it's nice to have a list of prompts to think about. And one of the things I think maybe we were going to broadcast out was that, you could either try and get through each of them and think about your questions for each one of them, or go in deep on one of them and really discuss it in depth. But if possible, if anyone who is from any of the breakout rooms wants to just toss in the chat any of these questions. So what did you figure out? Were there any aha moments or something that you thought was really relevant to your campus? Do you have any questions about data collection or usage? And where did this want to make you dig in deeper? So this could be, relating to the questions that we just shared. It could also just be something related to the presentation in general. So if there's anyone who wants to toss it in the chat, and also if you'd like to raise your hand and just address the group, that's also perfectly fine, and you can come off mute. Okay, so Chanel says, we talked about a recent event on campus where we had a student-parent study session in collaboration with our tutoring center. So this is awesome. Was this an SD Mesa example where Teresa, where I know one school that we've worked with, determined that student parents were struggling in one particular program. And when they engaged with those students, what they learned was that the tutoring times were extremely inconvenient for them. And there were a number of parenting students who really wanted to make tutoring, but couldn't. And so the school was making some parent-student specific tutoring opportunities that were at times that were surveyed by those students. That were meant for parenting students.
The kitty got hurt.
So that's an awesome
Trying to see. if
that's an
someone
awesome
take-
takeaway.
And
Okay, and so another one from Haley is that one of the key thoughts we had was looking at how sectionalizes that are as high as 70% in the second scenario with a group, how that could be overlooked.
I think that's referring to like the veteran students,
one,
like
yeah.
70% of them are parents, and like thinking about those like
Yeah.
intersections of the groups.
So that's a good example. I mean, I don't know that it was 100% overlooked, but again, that was an example from a real school in Texas, who said when they did that cross-sectionalization, like you mentioned, they just couldn't believe how many of their veterans were parents. It's also vice versa, but for them, it was more so that they realized they had staff who were responsible for veteran outreach and supports for veterans, but those materials weren't necessarily catered to parents. And so they were revisiting their veteran outreach and support materials to adjust those to say, okay, we know that a ton of these folks are parents. Part of that's because veterans tend to be older. There's a bunch of reasons for that, but nevertheless, they were like, we are going to put parenting front and center in these veteran outreach materials, and they had not done that before. It's not that the folks who worked with veterans were like completely ignorant to the fact that some of these students were parents. They just didn't have that number in hand, like 70%. I think for them, they knew like, oh, it's a good number. But if you don't ask students specifically and students don't volunteer it, you might have no idea. It could be a huge subpopulation. Anything else? Any questions about the data collection or usage, or any aha moments about your own campus or anything like that that folks want to toss in the chat? I hope it was good to at least reflect on the kinds of scenarios and the questions and how they relate to each individual campus. Because again, these are situations that different schools have actually grappled with that we've talked to. I can add one thing. We kind of talked about this already, but I think looking a very kind of basic thing, but still one layer down from just knowing like how many student parents you have on campus and how they're doing, is how students are doing by program. I think that's something that, we talked to one school, for example, who looked across all their programs, looked at course completion rates and GPAs and grades across all the different programs, and they found one program that really stuck out. They found a lot of programs where parenting students were doing about the same as non-parenting students, but they found one program where student parents were doing a lot worse, and it really stood out like a sore thumb. And I don't know what they ended up doing about it, because this was during a summer engagement, but it gave them a really good starting point to go and understand and to like work with faculty in that program, see like what are the policies, what's going on in this program that could be challenging for parents. Let's talk to the students in that program. Let's talk to the faculty, not like anyone's in trouble or anything, but like we have a good starting point to say like, hey, there's this one area where we can now focus our attention on, instead of just kind of trying to focus your attention everywhere. And so that's one way that data can really help, to just know like, hey, in this one program, parenting students are doing great, but in this other one, not so much. And then you can really help allocate your time. Um, and so I think that's something that's really powerful. And SD Mesa in that example earlier, that same kind of analysis led them to see that a 3 absence policy was really hurting parents in one particular program. Which again is not to say that attendance isn't important, but just thinking about how to soften that policy, or at least make professors or faculty aware of the challenge that it is, and see if there's ways to, make reasonable exceptions or accommodations is what I would say.
I think we've got 3 minutes left, Nathan. Do we want to go to the final wrap?
Yeah, let's go. But please add anything else to the chat if you have any final thoughts. So for next time, we're going to use data we're going to talk about how to use data to inform services that support student parent success. So how to connect these two pieces. We've talked about some general frameworks for action, some ideas for how to use data for that, but then we're going to get much more in depth into how to actually improve and build out those services that support student parent success, and what a process looks like for going about that. So that's Tuesday, October 28th, 2 to 3:30 p.m. Eastern, or 11 to 12:30 Pacific. Yeah, wear your costumes. And please bring your student service friends. Is there really no pumpkin or there's a ghost emoji? Bring your student service friends, student parents. This is a great time to bring your student parent members on campus who might be interested in this, or your boss, to build that buy-in for these crucial student support services. So I've kind of already asked for any final reflections, but if there's anything you want to toss in the chat now, please go ahead before I pass it back to Mia for a final closeout. But I wanted to thank everybody for attending. Oh, the first session, that should say second session. But if you attended both, thank you for attending both. Thank you for attending this one. We really hope you attend the third. Really, really do. And please stay in touch. This is our contact information. And I'm just going to pass it back to Mia really quickly in case she has any closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Nathan. No, I just wanted to say thanks to everyone who attended and thank you for your engagement and for sharing information about your activities on your campus and information and lessons learned through your role on campus. Our contact information is here, so please feel free to reach out to any or all of us with any questions. And again, we have the Kids on Campus website, which will also provide some additional information about our project and partnership with Head Start. And I'm trying to quickly add that link here in case you want to access that information. But again, thank you for your time this afternoon. The information will be forwarded to everyone. We have your email addresses. Thank you for the correction, Teresa. I saw that the W off. And if there are no further questions, then have a great afternoon, and we look forward to seeing you in October. Have a great day.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.